I mentioned earlier, we talked a lot around the kind of servant leadership aspect, that, if you like, inverting the hierarchical pyramid, that you serve rather than per se giving the instructions or the orders. And of course, there are times when that's a difficult path to walk, because you're really, if you invert fully, you are putting an awful lot of the responsibility into teams and into individuals.
Hey Simon, welcome to the ProductHooman show. How's it going for you today?
Yeah, it's coming towards end of day this end UK, but good to be here, Arnab, and thank you for the invite.
Yeah. Before we start, right, I think the most basic question that I have is, and for the listeners who are listening to this podcast, is if you can just tell a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your background, and then from there we can probably, move towards more deeper questions.
Yeah, sure, with pleasure. I'll keep it relatively short. We're here to talk about product. Whilst I have a product background, I actually came from an accounting background originally. So I've been working quite a few years now, shall we say. There was a point which I'm sure we'll explore in a little more detail during the conversation, but around about, let me see, nearly about 14 years or so ago now, where like everybody else who sort of did, certainly back then, I sort of fell into this thing called product management. One day somebody just said to me, would you like to be in product? And I was currently working in business analysis. And I thought, yes, that sounds a lot more fun than what I'm doing now. So I don't know what it is, but we'll give it a go. So that sort of took me on a journey no doubt we're going to explore a little more detail, as I say, today, but through all of the different kinds of roles from base product owner upwards. So I feel as if I've had a great journey through product to what I'm doing now, which is much more around thought leadership. And I'm working with an organization now really in a specific area of software for product leadership and product teams, and seeking to really sort of help them grow awareness and help to evangelize really what this particular area, which is life cycle, is all about. Because I've become very passionate over the recent years about really trying to power up teams with the best capabilities and skills and tools, etc. So it's been a fun journey. It continues to be a fun journey, and that's sort of how it's been.
No, perfect. No, that sounds like a long journey that you have been into when it comes to product. With that said, yeah, right. Like I have this question to a lot of people, and like this goes specific to you as well, is that you have been into product management for around like 14 years now, as you said, right? And what is that one thing that has become like basic for you, like your basic thesis to, let's say, whenever you're approaching a problem or anything around building a product? What does that basic thesis look like for Simon?
Yeah, do you know it's a fabulous question to come in with at the start, and
Yeah.
there are probably lots of different ways that anyone you ask that to could approach
Yeah.
that. So
True.
as I take a moment to think about what that one thing would be, that almost elevator style pitch of it, I think it would be about really trying to focus the role and I've led some very large teams,
Yeah.
and from scratch, and so I've had to think about this for the benefit of the team and the individuals who are going on that same journey. And I think it's about focusing ultimately on. I could pick a number of words here, but I'm going to say upon focusing on the why.
Okay.
I feel that I've seen too often where product can get drawn into the how or into the when, but really I think we're all about the what and the why, if you like. So if you can shape your mind such that that's where your focus should be, obviously what's going to come out of that is the benefit for the organization, for the business, for the user, for other systems that are dependent upon whatever products you're building. But ultimately, that all centers around what we're doing and why we're doing it. And I think that's at the heart of it.
No, totally makes sense. I think even a lot of seasoned sort of product managers also say that, at the end of the day, why becomes like super important rather than just thinking about what goes out, what goes in and stuff like that. And like the core is still building the product behind the screen, right? Like I think that's what it comes down to. Totally makes sense. And like you, as you said, like you have also worked with, companies like Walmart, you worked with companies like Emirates as well, right? And in case of Emirates, I think you have built out a whole team from scratch, right? And just wanted to understand, like, what were the key strategies you employed in building a team over there, and how do you define and evolve their roles in a growing organization, or organization that sort of adopted product management via you?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of questions there, and something you said at
Yeah,
the very end around, which is that sort of being accountable for almost adopting it via
yeah,
my leadership and the leadership around
right,
me. And I
right.
felt a significant responsibility with that. When that's just one example of other areas that I've done similar things. But when I walked into that amazing organization, it truly is an amazing place to be. They hadn't done, and this was within the IT function. So they hadn't done product previously, and were moving towards it because it was part of the, that sort of standard digital transformation, and underpinned with an approach towards a safe methodology. So new roles, not just in product, were coming to the
Mhm.
fore, and it was my responsibility to lead that function, that chapter, so to speak, into the brave new world of product. Because when I got there, everybody was a business analyst, effectively. A bit like your very first question, you're rewiring the mindset to start with to think more about that what and that why, rather than upon more output based activities. Which were very focused in the when and the how, I found. So there was a great deal there around the re-education, if you like, of the mindset, and you're not there to brainwash. You're there to find out if the team are ready for that, and not just in terms of their working practices, but just in terms of them as an individual. And
Got
of
it.
course, it's not for everybody. Some people won't want to do that, and some people won't necessarily, as I put it, be wired in that kind of way to be good at it. And that was always going to happen, and it did happen. But then the contrary to that, the opposite to that, is there were a great many people who were absolutely ready for it and absolutely wanted to embrace it and learn. So when you can start and reshape a team where you're using people with the appetite and with the mindset to learn something new like product, as well as you have a remit to bring in new individuals from other areas of the organization or from outside of the organization, then you're starting to create momentum. And we therefore needed to, another one of your points really about how did we do that? How did you really create that momentum? So there's probably a couple of things I would share here. First is I very much like to embrace the global community concept. So we introduced the opportunity to listen to others from outside of the organization. If you listen just from within inside your organization, you really listen to organizational speak,
Right.
and that sort of set language that comes from being embedded inside any company, really. So we took this opportunity to listen to product leaders and other leaders from other roles from other companies across my network, and then ultimately the team started to step up and bring people from their network just to tell us their story about their journey of either coming into and working in product, or having worked with product if they were, say, in engineering or in design, etc. So that was a great way to really enthuse the team to learn from and listen to and learn from others who've been on a journey themselves, just like we're talking about today.
Yeah.
But then, secondly, I think as well, people need to know that they are progressing and performing. So we built a development framework, but that development framework was really important to me, that it was almost governed by the teams themselves. So a number of the team really sort of stepped up to help to launch and distill this framework across the entire team. We talk about a team of 150 in product here.
Yeah.
That was a large team. And so therefore you're hearing from your own, and you're getting the kind of feedback on your progression from those within product and those in other, say, engineering roles within your team. So rather than trying to make it feel like it was very sort of top down viewpoint, to make it look more like we'd inverted it, and it was about the feedback coming through the teams. So they were the two key approaches I took.
And like, what was the bigger problem statement? Like in general, what was the problem statement if you had to like just say like, okay, this is what we were trying to solve in Emirates, right? Like one, you said that, it is not a tech first company, and then the digital adoption was happening. We get the point of like, company moving towards a digital adoption, but on an overall perspective, right? Like what was that one single problem statement that everyone in the product team or the company was trying to chase with that initiative?
Well, this was within the IT team, and the IT
Okay,
team there is, best part of 3,000 people. So
got it.
it's a significant operation. Product alone is one of those segments there at 150. So large enough in its own right, but
Yeah,
clearly heavily dominated more by engineering numbers, as you can imagine
right.
amongst. So first and foremost, what we're trying to do is take the working practices and working methods and bring them more up to date through that kind of transformation, that
Got it.
shift to a framework, which in this case was a safe framework. So that sort of scaled agile approach. So, the underpinning opportunity behind all of that was to make that function even more credible, make it faster, make it more effective, make it deliver more value at pace. So, all of the things you would expect from any kind of transformation activity,
Yeah.
and in an organization which very successful organization, of course, continues always had built fantastic products. It wasn't as if we were trying to solve something that was broken. It was to make it better.
When you say, the product team was large enough as 150 people, right? Which also brings in a significant amount of challenges like communication, aligning your stakeholders, keeping everyone motivated, with also a diverse team. Like it's basically a mix of a lot of people in general, right? As you also said, like you were trying to bring in people from outside as well. Like how do you sort of make sure that you maintain that effective communication, the alignment from the stakeholder versus what you're trying to build, and obviously continuously motivating the team as a leader in this large set of team members? Like what does that life basically look like is what I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't think it's unique to that brand, but in any brand that
Any,
I've
yeah,
worked in the product space, let alone
yeah.
even outside of the product space, when it comes to stakeholder management, that's always going to be challenging. And, there's no point in, hiding under a rock about this. It's
Yeah,
always challenging. And
correct.
it's always challenging in my experience because there's always, to a degree, a top down ambition in these things of who's telling who what to do. So I think at the heart of everything I stand for, and when I look to build and evolve teams, is that we're all in it together. So you've really got to work very hard to get those messages across that they're not about a power shift. They're not about control. They're about, like you just said in the previous question, how can we
Yeah,
do things better, faster, more efficiently, and
correct.
collaborate better? So I think at the heart of that, when I'm talking with teams, is about humility and transparency. So it's okay to be transparent. It's okay to be very humble in those conversations, and it's okay to use some of the old fail fast type stuff. It's okay to not get it right all the time.
Yeah,
Uh, but if you build the right relationships, then people will come on that journey with you throughout all of the roles, not just in IT, not just in product, across the whole organization. And this is a big question at the end of the day.
yeah,
They often are, but I think if you're going to bring the stakeholder journey effectively together, you've got to work very, very hard at building those relationships, not just yourself as from a leadership perspective, but
yeah.
arguably even more so from the team themselves. So that requires you to be able to look in the mirror and think about how are you going to do that better every day. And I do think at the heart of that, good humility and good transparency is key.
Yeah, I think the gist is that you need to know how to maintain like good relationship. You should know how to have better relationship anywhere in the whole organization when it comes to like having great communication in general.
Of course, I think we
Yeah,
can say that in any of the roles in any of the
great.
organisations we've worked in, and it's
Yeah,
easy to say and super difficult to do
yeah,
because you get lost in the day job to a degree. You get
yeah.
lost a bit in the culture of an organisation or the region you might be in or the country, etc. There are a lot of factors which can disturb what sounds like a very smooth path but isn't.
And like coming to a different role, or I would say like a different segment of company that you worked at is, let's say, Walmart, right? So what kind of problems were there, that in terms of product that you were trying to solve in Walmart? And then maybe we'll probably go deeper into that journey as well. But just to give that overall gist of, these were some of the bigger problems that we're trying to solve in Walmart. What does those look like?
I mean, uh, my journey at Walmart was a long journey in product. I spent
Yeah,
eight,
5 years,
nine.
I guess. Yeah.
Well, no, I think I started there in 2009.
Okay.
It come 2011. Now, when I say
Okay.
Walmart, I
Yeah.
was working for the UK subsidiary, if you like, or
Got
the
it.
UK arm that to start with anyway, that was
Yeah.
owned by Walmart at the time.
Got it.
And one thing I'll always be very proud of, I think I won this race by about a week or maybe 2 weeks, but I was the
Yeah.
first ever product owner in that brand in the UK.
Oh, interesting.
And it's what I said at the very start. I was working in the core IT team as a business
Right.
analyst. Um, I think I would profess that I probably wasn't the best business analyst in the world, and somebody came along one day from the business side, if you like, the commercial side of the e-commerce operation I was working with, and said, "How would you like to be a product owner?" And I was like, yeah, I'd love to do that. And that was 3 o'clock on a Friday. And at 9 o'clock on the Monday, I walked into this thing called product owner and had no idea what it was. But fortunately, I was working with a fabulous offshore team in Eastern Europe. And, they were very skilled and experienced, through a third party vendor. And, I learned with them. And a lot of those people are some of my great friends to this day. Fabulous
Yeah.
people to work with, wonderful energy, and a real ambition to solve the problem that you're referring to. And that problem was the classic sort of move away from a more waterfall led way of operating and thinking. For example, I was doing some work as an analyst on a checkout revamp, and I still have the 200-page document that I wrote and had red penned more than anything I had red penned at school, like my homework ever
Yeah.
was, over a 6 month period. The point is, nothing got really done for a 6 month period other than
Mm,
lots of talk, lots of burning of money, and
mm,
a document to then effectively, in that classic style of sort of throw it over the fence and see what comes back. So we changed that whole piece to much more ownership, much more accountability and decision making, to slicing up a large body of work like that. It was nearly a year's worth of work, and actually
mm,
starting to see some deliverables on a release cadence. So instead of thinking it's going to take us 9 months or whatever to build a brand new end to end checkout with lots of new capabilities and features, we started to release things really quickly. What's now pretty much standard and understood by anybody who
yeah.
works in those roles and organizations. But then it was completely left field.
Right.
And fortunately, we had a fantastic and inspirational leader in the business who
Mm,
saw that opportunity to deliver at pace and to deliver that change and that value quickly. So fundamentally, when I got started, that was the problem we were seeking to solve.
mm,
As my experience and my roles grew and matured, you moved into other problems like when we were moving from our existing platform to become part of Walmart's global platform initiative at the time. So something much more strategic and large scale. But initially, and I could talk to you about it with a really load of excitement for hours. It was that fabulous experience of let's pull apart the old and try something new.
new.
And we
Mm.
really pulled it off. It was a very refreshing place to be, not only from what you learned, but from what you achieved.
No, totally makes sense, and feels like, it also comes with a lot of culture as well, in terms of even just experimenting things, right? Like you really need people to sort of also push you. So do you think the culture also helped in doing experiments like this?
Yes, I mean, I alluded to it a little bit earlier about how culture can be really important in this culture of the organization, culture of the teams and people you work with around the world. You've got to, we spent a lot of time thinking about the fact that we were working with people from multiple different continents on a lot of this, and we don't all per se operate and think alike. So it's really important to be able to cross those cultural boundaries and challenges, and to recognize that everyone will have a slightly different take on it. But the organization itself, the point of difference was this significant appetite and the leadership direction for change, and prepared to be accountable for what was a significant level of change. When you're moving a large organization away from its tried and tested processes, you are sort of putting your neck on the line a little bit. So, yeah, you've got to have that support when you're in that kind of transformational journey, or you'll have too many detractors that will pull you apart. Fortunately, we didn't have that.
Because Walmart falls into that retail section, right? And if you had to explain, somebody like, let's say, someone who is jumping into product management, what does the world of retail basically look like? Like, what are some of these problems that on a daily basis that the business first prioritize, and then like you try and go and solve those? Like, what are those big problems in retail that every company who is operating like Walmart would actually go and face?
I mean, there are lots, but I think the one that would always stand out to me would be the, if you like, the fulfillment journey. Or
If you
the
have to
last.
give an example, let's say a buying process of someone as a user and then going from A to B, like what
Yeah,
would that look like?
from here we are sat behind our laptop placing our order to the
Right.
point of actually, let's say, collecting something in store. So one of the
Yeah.
initiatives that I worked very closely on was the principle of click and collect, being able to go into the store and to pick up your order. And initially, that was a relatively manual process, and there have been lots of technological evolutions, shall we say, technology evolutions, which have made that a much more automated and streamlined process. But back then,
Yeah.
it was almost still you walking in with a piece of paper and
Yeah.
say, "Hey, I'm here to come and pick up this
These are the
order."
things. Yeah.
Somebody going looking for it. It wasn't necessarily using some self-service technologies or
Correct.
some automated technologies, etc. So, working on that across a 600 plus retail estate to connect those two things together. So to connect the user sat in their office, in their living room, whatever it may be, to ultimately an experience which could be next day experience, could
Yeah.
be a name day, next week experience. That kind of piece, which we now see done so well by so many brands, back
Yeah.
then I think, was very challenging, even 10 years or so ago. So that was really fun, really facing
Yeah.
into the experience for the user in a store.
When you said, now it is easy, is it because the processes have been defined from so many years, considering, like, let's say the supply chain problem, or let's say the technology coming in, and there are some standards to how e-commerce pattern and those things work? Was that the problem, or was there something else that was missing in the layer of, when you were trying to solve the problem at that point of time?
I think there was an immaturity in the technologies that were
Of
available.
how, yeah, of how they
Yeah.
were using the technology was basically immature, right?
Well, yes, in terms of how you're using it, but also across the supply chain, as you say, and in some of
Hmm.
the fulfillment network, the carrier networks that you might use.
Hmm.
The experience we have today is not the experience we had 10 years plus ago. There was
Hmm.
still immature technologies and processes in their world, and a lot went wrong.
Got it.
And as a result, you had probably, compared to today, it's never going to be a perfect world, but you had a lot more things maybe went missing or
Hmm.
got there damaged, and you needed to have a really strong returns process, which is so much better these days, but not then.
Yeah.
So that was a
Right.
very difficult and very costly area to
Hmm.
navigate. To think through that in a lot of detail, because you did have a degree of limitation around you, either from inside your own organization and operation, or indeed the partners you worked with?
And this is just a curiosity question, is it like, do you think, and obviously a lot of things have changed, where there are two kind of experiences, which experiences that happens for a retail store. One is like you go into a store and there is a process to, user buying something, versus now people sort of moved towards ordering online, right? Or basically getting their stuff in. There's obviously a certain pattern that has changed in terms of behavior, as well as the way people are consuming. Was this evolved problem or a defined problem at that point of time? Like, people have started thinking about this at that point of time, or it took time for it to come to Walmart, and then they sort of started coming into more digital phase, and then, yeah, probably would love to know about that.
As I sort of just alluded to, really, it was a world that was changing quite significantly in the early part of that last decade. I think that the amount of product, if you like, whether we're talking about just the range of product that you could have delivered to your home, was minimal. The amount of organizations who had the ability for you to pick that up from one of their retail locations, or indeed from maybe a third party location, take something like lockers, again, quite commonplace now, but not then. So you were exploring a very fast shifting market where the time poor customer was becoming much more
Much more.
relevant and prevalent. And you had to think about how to do these things different for someone who was, again, it comes through different generations as well, was changing their patterns. We're talking about a handful of years post the evolution of the smartphone. So the technologies associated with embracing what was coming out of the mobile technology space. Also, you had to think about how did you really be able to embrace into those. And that means you've got to think about, it's not just about that, but it's about the whole end-to-end experience. It starts right at the whole principle of let's change our whole shopping experience from what was purely on a desktop stroke laptop then,
Right.
really now starting to bring mobile into the
Mobile.
equation, and indeed any other channels. And that whole sort of omni or multi-channel kind of connectivity across large-scale organizations. Again, well-worn paths now, but back then, it did feel like we were breaking ground.
Obviously, you have been leading so many teams now, right? And like, what do you think are some of these leadership qualities that are essential for managing large teams, bigger enterprises in general? Like, what are those key pointers to say, like, okay, these are the 5 pointers which I feel like, every product leader needs to have when working with, such big enterprises in that sense?
Sure, yeah, it's difficult, for sure. It's another big question. I think that I'd probably start by saying, it is about that kind of empowerment, if you like, and that letting go. I mentioned earlier, we talked a lot around the kind of servant leadership aspect, that, if you like, inverting the hierarchical pyramid that you serve rather than per se giving the instructions or the orders. And of course, there are times when that's a difficult path to walk, because you're really, if you invert fully, you are putting an awful lot of the responsibility into teams and into individuals. So, first of all, just achieving that almost operating and cultural change is in itself very hard. So we're very fortunate in the orgs I've worked with to have great support and great change management that's really underpinning that level of pivot, if you like. But then once you start to do that, then you've got to think very carefully about the individuals themselves, because you're putting a lot more focus and responsibility and therefore pressure on them to make more of the decisions. And yeah, that doesn't just apply in a product role. That applies in all the roles in the teams who are effectively serving and
True.
driving forward those products. And
True.
that's not for everyone. And it's also not something that people in those roles perhaps have experienced before. So you need to spend a lot of time in the coaching, in the evangelizing, if you like, in that kind of inspiring. You can trust in yourself to do this, and no one's going to come back at you and give you a really negative or hard time for the decisions that you take. And again, that's a big thing for an individual or for a company at either end of the spectrum. So you've got to work very hard on that. And I think that's where I mentioned earlier in this conversation as well about having something in place as a framework which allows you to see how you are developing, and much more from a peer review perspective. Those peers could be within your same product role, or they could be in the engineering, in the architectural space, but you've got that opportunity to openly share and review with each other. And I think if you feel as if you are hearing that kind of feedback and learning from those around you, as well as I also mentioned about hearing from those outside of your organization, keeping that inspiration going with storylines and experiences of somebody who worked in a Walmart or worked in whatever other organization.
Yeah.
Could be your sector, could be elsewhere. It doesn't really matter, but it's again just giving you new ideas to be able to think about. And I think finally, I've sort of given you about four there, maybe a fifth
Yeah.
one. Definitely got to invest in the training and the
Yeah.
development. And that's not just about how you do the role, but about who
Yeah.
you need to be. So there's a great deal of focus there, not just on what's great about being a product person in whatever framework in an organization and a team, but also who do you need to be, and recognizing that there's a lot of individual change required here in terms of how you might think and operate. So not something to be taken lightly and missed.
No, totally makes sense. And like when you say frameworks, like what are some of your favorites? And if you could just break it down it for us, like I'm pretty sure everyone likes a map rather than just being into the wild and solving the problems. But yeah, frameworks do help with giving you a map of how to think about the problem. So what are some of your favorite ones? And if you can just break it down for us.
Yeah, I'm going to be slightly careful here because
Yeah.
if you've only got to spend a short amount of time on LinkedIn, and you will
Yeah.
see an awful lot of
Yeah, of
people
course.
um,
True.
being a keyboard warrior behind what they believe about particular frameworks.
Okay.
Um, I haven't actually worked with that many. Done some Kanban and done a lot of Scrum, which is where I started to
Yeah.
sort of cut my teeth and learn my trade in product all those years ago, and then right through to experiences like a digital transformation underpinned with something like Scaled Agile. They all have a time and a place, and they have a value,
Mm,
and it's very easy to
mm,
criticize them, sometimes more than it is
mm.
to really embrace the successes that come from those kind of frameworks. But I think, when I look back on my time working initially in the product roles with the offshore teams around the world, as I was alluding to earlier, we were using just the fundamental basics of Scrum, and it was very effective. I read lots of things about how it's ineffective or this, that, and the other from all the keyboard warriors across the world. But I can only speak to my own experiences of how it really helped us to have something to hang our hat on, and was very effective for us. Things change, things evolve, it moves on into different versions and derivatives of that. And I'm not here to either support or criticize those.
Yeah.
But my own experiences were that it was quite simple. If we stuck to the purpose of it and the roles associated with it, it was very effective. And I can never get away from the fact that we would see it bear fruit. So it was great. But something like Scaled, wow, I mean, different problem. Bigger problem to solve. How do you connect together 3,000 people across their framework? You need something more
Right.
solid, something a
Yeah.
little more technical, if you like.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
it's horses for courses, Arnav.
Mm.
What works for one enormously large company compared
Mm.
to another enormously large company or a small company is always going to be slightly different. And I think it's
Yeah.
important to recognize that and flex accordingly.
True, true. No, totally makes sense. I think a lot of like people I've also talked to in this podcast itself also says that, it depends on where you choose, what you choose, and what kind of problem that comes in, depending on that, those framework comes in. But obviously, it's not like a rigid way to solve any kind of problem, right? So yeah, that stays constant there.
Yeah, definitely. And definitely now, I think
Yeah,
when I got started, it was probably a little more rigid, a little more
yeah,
linear, but it
yeah.
needed to be. We were doing something for the very, very first time. that
First thing,
nobody really
correct.
understood. So it kept you straight. It kept you on a clearly defined line. And the vast majority of us who were working on that, other than some of our Eastern European offshore partners, had never done it
Correct.
before. I think it's a bit different now. You can go into
Yeah.
all many organizations now, and so many of us have got so much more experience. So you can flex that and bend those rules a little bit more. And that's fine. Whatever works most effectively for the organization.
Perfect. We just reached to this fun part of the podcast now,
Okay.
where there's some sort of questions that are just to understand a little bit on your side of how you think about a couple of different part of the product building process. So just to begin with, right? What's that one thing that you absolutely love about your job?
Well, my job now is very different. I'm not working with large teams now. I'm working in a space about something I'm
Or
very
in general, maybe what is that one thing that you love being a product person like that?
Oh, the one thing I
Yeah.
love more than anything else is seeing and creating, if you like, a landscape for an opportunity for talented people and teams to excel. And there are, even what I'm doing, the area I'm working in now is all part and parcel of that, about providing the right tools to those people.
Yeah.
But ultimately, whether it's the individual skills you have, or the training in a particular framework you have, or the tools that you use, or how you interact with your stakeholders, all the many things we're talking about, at the
Yeah.
heart of that, if you're going to be good at product, I think you have to be talented at product. I don't
Yeah.
think you can shoehorn the skill set into an
Yeah.
individual. I think you sort of end up more closely with like a domain specialist if you do that. What I think the really talented product people can go anywhere in
Yeah.
any sector, in any organization, in any sort of type of team or product, and they can excel at it because they know what it means at the heart of it. Right back to the start of our conversation about
Yeah.
the what, the why, the value, the
True.
outcomes, all of those kind of things, which are now just standard phrases and buzzwords. But
Correct.
for me, that's what I'm always looking for, and then thinking, how can I give you the best possible working environment and landscape so you can thrive and excel? And I get the most pleasure from seeing talented people grow.
No, pretty interesting. And what are some of the emerging sort of trends you're looking into the industry and that also excites you at the same point of time?
Great question indeed. I think the thing which I'm really interested in most at the moment, and again, it does play a lot to where I've pivoted myself to, and kind of space I'm working in, is how we think a lot more about the product before we really get started. So I can throw all the kind of standard words like vision, like strategy, the sort of the design equation into that. So much more thinking about less about just what it is that we are building and executing, if you like, much more thinking about, well, why is there a need here? What's changing in the market space? What's changing, like you said earlier, with the users? What was it that
Yeah.
at that particular time in that
Right.
particular retail sector was starting to be the pivot in the need from the users, and thinking more strategically about that. How does it align to how your vision is or needs to change? And
Yeah.
what does that mean for the investment and the activities that you put in place around design? So all of that kind of area, I read a lot about it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of content and a lot of thought leadership out there. I think what I'm excited about is seeing how it develops into more effective execution.
No, totally makes sense. And when I was like, when we were also talking about the previous question about, when you just said that these frameworks were rigid in nature at that point of time because it helped you to, sort of think in a certain way. I mean, which was all important at that point of time as well. But then what happens before you actually jump into the problem is more important, right? What does that process also look like is something that people should be caring about.
Very much so. And it's
Yeah.
great to see, I'm not here to name names, but I love to be able to go and consume a lot of the thought leadership content that I see on a LinkedIn or many other platforms. And to be able to read that in a quite objective way. And what I really look for at the end of it though is, well, but how are you going to actually infuse that and execute that inside an organization? And I don't think there's that much of that happening just yet.
Yeah.
When I go to talk with people, say at a conference, In fact, I remember being at a conference last year where I was hosted a little mini roundtable, and we were talking about things like this and about toolkits, etc. There's lots of understanding. There's lots of ideas. There's lots of ambition because people are consuming so much of this thought leadership and content. However, when they go back to base, the execution level is still very small.
Yes, yes, got it.
So, that for me is the exciting part, is how that begins to build and become,
Yeah.
more the norm.
Like, what's something that you learned slash probably realized recently in your work journey that you wish you knew earlier?
Yeah, I think, and it's not just because it's the area I'm working in now, but it's the epiphany really of the opportunity to really embrace the ever growing, ever burgeoning number of toolkits that are out there. And I think not only now, but certainly looking back, about how more effective we could have been if, as a product team, we had been able to invest in, if they even existed, but able to invest in a suite of tools that would help us to simplify the problem, whether that be around strategy or around roadmap or around life cycle or prioritization, etc.
Yeah.
I think that it wasn't that prevalent, it wasn't that obvious, it wasn't that well known at the time. And as I look and see how that, I spend a lot of time in this space. It's where I work anyway.
Yeah.
And I see how that market is developing. But still not necessarily as much use of it
Got it.
as would be great to see infuse into those product teams and see the benefit that they would have. So I think there's it's an epiphany. It's fairly obvious to me now, but I think I still feel for a lot of product teams and organizations that they maybe not got the buying decisions, or maybe not got the budgets or the authority, if you like, to be able to take those steps themselves. So yeah, that's sort of, and I remember being there. So that's my reflection.
No, makes sense. And like, if you don't mind sharing, like, what's that one mistake you have done and will advise others not to repeat it?
Oh, for sure. Oh, I've made lots, but I think the one, you were talking about it earlier around stakeholders. This is something that I definitely didn't get right to start with, and perhaps at many other occasions, because you can spend a lot of time sort of fighting for your own ground. I think in the orgs we work in and the roles we work in, and what you do and what you don't do, and what you stand for and what you don't stand for, and we should be doing that and you shouldn't be doing that, and that can become quite a almost argumentative and brittle conversation, and it builds walls, it builds barriers to a degree. And I've done that. Absolutely, I've done that.
Yeah.
And I've fought those corners very hard for a lot of right reasons. And I think in hindsight, for a lot of wrong reasons. So, I wish I personally had maybe been better trained and better invested in, so that I could see those signs and signals earlier and react earlier and develop earlier. Because it's very clear to me now, as I mentioned earlier, about that humility and about that transparency and relationship building, to get that right very early on. Otherwise, it does become a bit of a fight.
Yeah.
And I think I can speak for almost everybody that we've all walked that path. So, yeah, it's tough. It's a tough one. And I don't even know if I would do it right next time either, but
Yeah.
I know I would certainly be more aware of it.
Just to sort of, this would be like the last two questions. One is, what are some of your biggest inspiration to sort of get up and go to work? Like, where do you get inspired from?
Yeah, well, I'll probably put two things there.
Yeah.
One is the ability to actually make a difference. So, I'm working away from those large scale teams and transformations
Yeah.
now. Whether I was in them or now out of them, it's about what is the difference that you can actually make. And it's that sort of classic, right? What do I do today that I do
Yeah.
better, that
Correct.
makes a difference to not just myself, but to others and to the organization? I think that, first of all. And secondly, it really comes down to great leadership. I've been very lucky to work with some fantastic leaders who give you the right amount of airtime and the right amount of opportunity to be yourself. that kind of sort of servant leadership approach that I talked about earlier. There are always boundaries, of course, there will be in any organization, but that enthuses me when you know that you've got an environment you can go into which is very supportive, very much about growth, very much about allowing you to express yourself. It's why I said what I said about seeing talented people have the right landscape to be able to thrive and grow. So, because that's what makes me thrive. If I feel as if I'm going to go in and I'm not going to be sort of tied and held back all the time, that the opportunity is there to really make a difference. So yeah, that's what really enthuses me.
And coming to our last question, which is, what would you recommend to people who want to start their career in this space? Like, what is that one, I would say, advice? I think there are a bomb of advice that we've already gotten over here, but that to someone who is as young as, let's say, starting their career, right? Like, what would you say before they start and be like, okay, this is what the product world looks like?
Well, to the last point there,
Yeah,
this is a great way to finish, by the way.
yeah,
To the last point there, I think that there are a number of factors that you need to be very aware of and eyes wide open when you walk in. As much as you might have studied it or consumed the thought leadership there, and that don't pretend that you're necessarily going to walk into an organization and it's going to be all shiny and doing all of those things.
yeah,
It's not, for all of the kind of reasons that we've just talked about. And I think you will have to prepare yourself and sort of steel yourself that you're going to get some setbacks to what you think might be the textbook of operating in this wonderful, great role that everybody says is fabulous, called product. And it is
yeah,
fabulous. But at times you can feel a bit more sometimes like an agent of delivery, or
yeah,
at times you can feel like you don't have that kind of voice or that kind of environment to really demonstrate and express your talent. It's not everywhere. I'm not being negative about it. I'm just trying to paint a picture that there's a real world for you to walk into. So you've got to be tough enough to cope with that, and to learn from that and to be able to adapt accordingly. I
true.
think secondly, you've got to ask, I like to say, you've got to look in the mirror and
Yeah,
say, is it really for me? Now,
mm,
in many ways, you might never know until you try it. And I would advocate to anybody, give it a go, try it,
yeah,
absolutely. But there might come a point that it's not for you. I remember when I moved into the product role, as we said in an earlier question, another
yeah,
one of my colleagues who came along early very quickly went back to doing what they want before. This just says it's just not for me. And there's
yeah,
just things about this which just aren't for me. So don't try and be something you're not. If it is for you, then
yeah,
go at it at pace, suck
yeah,
it all up, really embrace it, and you'll be successful, I'm sure. But if it's not for
yeah,
you, accept that. I said earlier about how you have to sort of rewire yourself a little bit to be successful in product. When having the pleasure of interviewing people who want to come into product either for the first time or maybe they're even further down their career path, I'm always looking to see how they're wired, how they've wired themselves, if you like, so that they can be successful. Because it is very different. It's evolving very quickly, and it's going to continue to evolve and change for sure. So you've got to be able to go with that pace. And I think ultimately, at the very heart of it, the third thing is you have to have a love for your product and a
yeah,
love for the user of your product. Um,
correct.
and if you haven't got that love, then I think you're better placed maybe in some other roles. You might be better placed in the business side. You might be better placed as an architect because you're more interested in solutions. You might
Yeah,
be better placed in delivery roles because you're more interested in timelines and outputs, for example. But if you
yeah,
want to be in product, you need to be able to say, I'm going to really focus in on this product, why it exists, who is it for, and how I can make it better for them. You've got to be able to put yourself in their shoes.
yeah,
And if you haven't got those sort of three fundamental building blocks and that kind of humility about the ability to look at yourself, then it might not be for you. But if you have, and you can achieve that, then from my own experience, I've seen some incredibly talented people grow really quickly because everything is right for them and how they have shaped themselves to be successful. Then it really clicks, and I love to see that.
Perfect, perfect. What an amazing conclusion to someone who might be just thinking about getting into product. I think this definitely gives the behind the scenes, I would say, the way you might think about product versus what actually happens. So yeah, thanks a lot for joining the call, and hope I loved like every bit of it. Like I loved every bit of the conversation that we both had, and I'm pretty sure there's some like I can get some like really juicy sort of content out of it, because it's like every bit of it was basically peeling the onion, right? Like basically just going from one step to another. That's how I felt about this whole conversation that we had, and hope you also enjoyed the same way.
Absolutely, my pleasure, and thank you so much for inviting me and to give the opportunity to share some of those experiences and the things that I believe in and very passionate about, and also the things you need to be careful to watch out for.
Yeah,
It's a fabulous journey, and
yeah,
age wise, I'm sort of coming further towards the end of that, so I'm always really passionate about speaking with people who've got lots of energy and lots
energy.
of time on their journey, and also. Really, as we've talked on a few times, the a chance to remind ourselves about all those
Yeah,
great talented people who are already there or are coming into the pipeline, and how
right.
we can really help to serve them to be better. It's been a really infusing hour or so just to
Yeah,
reconnect with that kind of pattern.
for sure, for sure. Thank you so much again, and yeah, talk to you soon.
Look forward to it, Arno. Have a lovely day. You
Yeah,
take care.
yeah. All
Thank you.
right. Bye
Bye-bye.
bye.